On the rugged planet of Zalthor, the air was thick with tension. The sun hummed low, casting an orange hue over the war-torn landscape. Joran Vel, a Verican mercenary, stood atop a crumbled building, scanning the horizon. His green skin blended into the shadows, his sharp eyes focused on the target, a high-ranking official who had crossed the wrong people. Joran's mission was simple: eliminate the target, collect the credits, and disappear into the shadows. But as he checked the glowing screen on his wrist, a strange sense of unease crept over him. The target's movements were erratic. Something was off. Joran wasn't one to question his orders, but there was a reason he had earned a reputation as one of the best. He could sense danger before it arrived. Meanwhile, on the other side of Zalthor, Ethan Graves, an Earth intelligence agent, was on his own mission. His orders were clear: extract the same target alive, bring him back to Earth for questioning, and uncover any plans that might threaten humanity. Ethan, a seasoned operative, had faced countless dangers, but nothing had prepared him for the situation he was about to walk into. Ethan crouched behind a shattered wall, his eyes trained on the target's last known location. His fingers hovered over the small communication device in his hand, waiting for confirmation from his team. But when the signal came through, it wasn't what he expected. Abort the mission. I repeat, abort the mission. Ethan's heart raced. Something had gone terribly wrong. His eyes darted across the crumbling city, realizing he wasn't alone. A shadow loomed behind him. Before he could react, a voice, deep and foreign, called out, "You're in my way." Ethan turned, surprised to see a tall figure standing in the dim light. The stranger was clearly not human. His skin was a dark green, almost like that of a reptile, with sharp features and an intimidating presence. The alien's hand rested on the hilt of a large weapon strapped to his back. "I don't know who you are, but you better step aside." "Mercenary." Ethan's voice was calm but firm. Joran studied the human before him. His instincts told him this wasn't a random soldier. There was something different about Ethan. The way he carried himself, the calmness in his eyes. It wasn't the look of someone who feared death. "Mercenary." Joran chuckled, a low, guttural sound. "You're the one who's in my way. I've been tracking my target for days." Ethan narrowed his eyes, realizing the man before him wasn't just some hired gun. He was a professional, like himself. But why was he after the same target? "We're after the same man, aren't we?" Ethan asked, his tone skeptical. "What's your mission?" Joran hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "My orders are simple. Kill the target. He's a threat to my people, and I'm getting paid to remove him." Ethan's brow furrowed. "You're here for an assassination, and you think I'm going to let you do it?" The tension between them grew thick. Both men were on opposite sides, yet both knew the target was of great importance. It wasn't just about money or orders anymore. They each believed they were on the right side of this conflict. "You don't understand, human," Joran said, stepping closer. "This isn't about some politician. This man is a threat to everyone. Your species, my species, everyone in the galaxy. I've seen what he's capable of." Ethan's eyes softened, but only for a moment. He had heard rumors about the target, rumors of his dangerous connections and his plans to spark interstellar war. But Ethan couldn't let a mercenary decide the fate of this man. Not without answers. Not without knowing more. "If he's such a threat, then why don't we work together?" Ethan suggested. "We both want him gone. Maybe we can take him down together." Joran's eyes narrowed. The idea of working with a human, especially one who was supposed to be his enemy, didn't sit well with him. But there was something in Ethan's eyes that made him pause. Perhaps just this once, a temporary alliance wouldn't hurt. Before Joran could respond, the sound of boots echoed in the distance. Both men turned, immediately on alert. A squad of syndicate soldiers appeared, weapons drawn. It seemed their conflict would have to wait. "I guess we don't have much of a choice," Joran muttered, drawing his weapon. Ethan smirked. "I guess not." In that moment, Their mission had gone awry. But in the chaos that followed, an unexpected partnership had begun. The sound of boots echoed off the shattered buildings, and the ground trembled beneath their feet as a squad of syndicate soldiers marched closer. Joran's sharp eyes scanned the environment, instinctively finding escape routes. Ethan stood beside him, both of them hidden behind a large rusted vehicle. "We don't have much time," Ethan whispered, his voice low. "We need to move fast." Joran nodded in agreement, his green skin blending into the shadows of the broken city. He had faced many enemies in his time as a mercenary, but the syndicate was a different kind of threat. They were ruthless, well-equipped, and they knew how to hunt down their targets. He had to admit, even he was feeling the pressure now. "You go left, I'll go right," Joran suggested, his voice calm. He motioned toward the narrow alleyways that ran between the ruins. "We'll split them up. They won't know what hit them." Ethan hesitated for a moment. It was dangerous to split up in a situation like this, but he trusted Joran's instincts. The alien mercenary had proven himself as more than just a killer. He was strategic, intelligent, and, surprisingly, cooperative. The two men might have been enemies just moments ago, but in the heat of the moment, they had already begun to form an understanding. "All right. Be careful," Ethan said, his hand resting on the pistol at his side. Without another word, they split. Joran moved swiftly, his steps silent on the cracked pavement. He crouched behind a pile of rubble, waiting for the syndicate soldiers to pass by. Ethan, on the other hand, used his stealth training to blend into the darkness of the alley, his mind sharp and focused. The plan was simple: take out the soldiers quietly, without drawing attention. As the first soldier passed by Joran's hiding spot, he pounced. With lightning speed, he grabbed the man from behind, his hand covering the soldier's mouth. A swift motion, and the soldier dropped to the ground without a sound. Joran's heart raced, but he didn't pause. The second soldier was already in his line of sight. Ethan was also making progress on his end. He crouched low, waiting for the perfect moment. When the soldier turned away, he lunged, grabbing the soldier's arm and twisting it behind his back, forcing him to the ground. Ethan quickly knocked him out with a quick strike to the back of the head. Just as they were about to regroup, they heard a loud explosion in the distance. The ground shook again, and this time it was not just the syndicate soldiers who were rattled. The sound came from a nearby building, a mysterious signal, one that Ethan had been briefed about. The target, Ambassador Kellen Rin, had to be somewhere in that building. "We've got to move," Ethan said, his eyes hardening. They'd found the target. Joran nodded, his weapon still ready. He didn't need to ask who they were. The syndicate was clearly after Rin. But why? What was so important about this one man that made him a target for everyone in the galaxy? As they rushed toward the building, they heard more voices, closer now. The syndicate soldiers had regrouped. They were no longer hunting blindly. They had a mission, and they were determined to complete it. "We need a plan," Joran said. He wasn't used to working with others, especially humans, but this situation was different. He could sense that Ethan's mind was already working through their options. "Agreed. I say we go through the back. We'll be less exposed that way," Ethan suggested. Joran's gaze flickered toward the building. The back entrance was less guarded, but it was also more dangerous. The syndicate was known for their traps, and it wouldn't be easy to slip past them unnoticed. Still, it was their best option. Time was running out. "You take the lead," Joran said, his voice steady. "I'll cover you." Ethan nodded, trusting Joran's judgment. They moved quickly, dodging behind walls and leaping over broken debris. They finally reached the back of the building, where a metal door was slightly ajar. Inside, it was quiet, too quiet. Both men knew that meant trouble. As they entered the building, the silence was broken by a soft clicking sound. A faint red light flashed, and before either could react, a trap was triggered. The door slammed shut, locking them inside. A bright light suddenly lit up, blinding them both for a moment. "We've been set up," Ethan muttered, realizing what had just happened. Joran clenched his jaw. The syndicate had known they were coming. Someone had tipped them off. But who? And why? Before they could process what was happening, a voice echoed through the building's intercom system. "You two should have stayed out of this. You've made a dangerous mistake." The voice was cold, mocking. It was clear they were no longer the hunters. They were the prey. "We'll see about that," Joran muttered under his breath. His grip tightened around his weapon. Ethan turned to him, his face determined. "Whatever happens, we get out of here. Together." Joran nodded. They didn't have many options, but one thing was clear now. They couldn't trust anyone. The only way out was together. The sound of footsteps echoed down the dark hallway, each step heavier than the last. Joran and Ethan had been trapped in the syndicate building for nearly an hour, and the pressure was starting to mount. Their weapons were still drawn, but there was no sign of their enemies, only silence and the occasional hum of broken lights overhead. "We need to find another way out," Ethan whispered, his voice low but urgent. "We can't stay here forever." Joran nodded, scanning the area with his sharp eyes. He could feel the weight of the situation. The syndicate wasn't just after their target anymore. They were after both of them. It wasn't just about money or power, it was personal. "Keep your eyes open. They're waiting for us to make a move." Ethan's gaze moved cautiously from one end of the corridor to the other. There was no sign of life, no noise, nothing except the faint buzz of flickering lights. It felt like they were walking through a ghost town. "If we move fast enough, we can reach the control room. I'll hack into their systems. That should open the doors." Ethan's plan was simple but risky. The syndicate was known for their security, and even though Ethan was good with tech, he couldn't guarantee the hack would go smoothly. "You sure about this?" Joran asked, his voice filled with a mix of doubt and curiosity. This whole building could be one big trap. Ethan looked back at him, determination in his eyes. "I don't have a choice. We're not getting out unless we take control of the situation." Joran sighed and nodded. "All right, we'll follow your lead. Just make it quick." They moved down the hallway, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet beneath them. As they rounded a corner, they saw the faint glow of a control panel down the hall. It was guarded, but only lightly, which suggested the syndicate didn't expect them to get this far. Ethan held up a hand, signaling for Joran to stop. He then carefully made his way toward the control panel, his fingers brushing over the edges of the console. He paused for a moment, studying the security codes. "Here goes nothing," he muttered, tapping the screen to begin the hacking process. For a moment, the screen flickered, then went dark. Ethan cursed under his breath, fingers flying across the panel as he tried again. This time, the lights above them blinked, and the sound of a door unlocking echoed down the hall. "We're in," Ethan said, breathing a sigh of relief. Joran's hand shot out to stop him. "Something's wrong." Ethan looked at him, confusion spreading across his face. Before he could ask what Joran meant, the sound of distant voices echoed from the far side of the building. The syndicate soldiers were closing in. "We've got to move now," Joran said, his voice urgent. Ethan nodded and ran toward the now unlocked door. As they entered the control room, they quickly closed the door behind them. Ethan immediately moved toward the main console, his hands flying across the buttons as he tried to access the building's security systems. "This won't be easy. It'll take a few minutes to disable the alarms," Ethan said, sweat trickling down his forehead as he worked. Joran stood guard by the door, his senses alert to any sound. The noise from the approaching soldiers grew louder, and he knew they were running out of time. Suddenly, a sharp sound rang through the air, something electronic shorting out. Ethan's eyes widened as he looked at the screen. "The backup systems are online. They must have set a trap." Joran cursed under his breath. The syndicate had anticipated their every move. There was no time left to waste. The soldiers would be on them any moment. "We need a way out. Now." Ethan's voice was strained as he tried to hack through the backup system. "I'm on it." Joren's voice was steady, but there was a flicker of concern in his eyes. His mind was already working, calculating their next move. If the doors didn't open soon, they'd be trapped with nowhere to run. "There's an escape tunnel behind this room," Joren said, pointing to a small vent on the far wall. "It'll take us outside the building, but it's narrow. We'll have to move fast." Ethan's fingers froze on the console. "Are you sure?" "It's the only option." Joren's voice was firm. "Trust me." Ethan hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "All right, let's go." They moved quickly toward the vent, their every step heavy with the knowledge that their time was running out. Joren pried open the cover, revealing the narrow tunnel inside. Without a word, he squeezed through, followed by Ethan. The tunnel was dark, and the air was thick with dust, but they couldn't afford to stop. Behind them, the door to the control room suddenly exploded open, and the sound of footsteps filled the air. The Syndicate soldiers had found them. "Hurry," Ethan urged, his voice tight as he pushed forward. The tunnel was cramped, but it offered the only chance of escape. Joren and Ethan moved through it with urgency, knowing that if they didn't get out of the building soon, they'd be trapped. But they weren't out yet. Danger still lurked around every corner. As they reached the end of the tunnel, the light of the outside world became visible, but there was no guarantee that safety awaited them on the other side. The Syndicate wasn't going to give up so easily. The cool night air hit Joren's face as he crawled through the narrow escape tunnel, his muscles aching from the tight space. He could hear Ethan's footsteps behind him, his breathing heavier than usual. They were close, so close to the outside world, yet the danger was far from over. The tunnel wasn't long, but it felt like an eternity. Joren could hear the distant sound of the Syndicate's voices growing louder, but there was no turning back now. They had to keep moving. As Joren crawled toward the light at the end of the tunnel, he felt a strange sensation in his chest. It wasn't just the adrenaline. There was something else, something deeper. It was the feeling of being hunted, of knowing that every move could be their last. Finally, the tunnel opened up into a small alley behind the Syndicate building. The night sky above them was clear, with 1,000 stars shining brightly. But Joren didn't take a moment to enjoy the view. He immediately turned to Ethan, who had just crawled out of the tunnel behind him. "This way," Joren said, his voice sharp. "We need to move fast." Ethan nodded without a word. They both knew that the Syndicate wouldn't let them escape easily. The sound of footsteps, now clearer, echoed from behind them. The soldiers were getting closer. The two of them quickly dashed into the shadows, their footsteps light on the cold concrete. Joren led the way, moving with speed and precision, always keeping his ears alert to any sign of danger. Ethan, following close behind, kept a hand on his sidearm, ready for anything. "We need a plan," Ethan muttered, his voice low but urgent. "If we keep running like this, they'll catch us for sure." Joren glanced over his shoulder. The alley stretched out ahead, dark and quiet, but he could sense the danger. "We need to find higher ground. There's a building 2 blocks away. If we can get to the roof, we can lose them." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "You're sure?" "That's risky." "It's our best chance." Joren's voice was firm, not giving an inch. "We won't outrun them on foot. We need to think smarter, not faster." Without another word, they both changed direction and sprinted toward the building. Joren had been in this city long enough to know that the rooftops were the best place to hide. They could disappear into the maze of buildings and take the Syndicate by surprise. As they reached the base of the building, Joren quickly scanned the area. The entrance was clear, no guards in sight. He signaled for Ethan to follow as they made their way toward the back entrance, a small door that led to the building's stairwell. But as they approached the door, the sound of a voice from behind froze them in their tracks. "Stop right there," a gruff voice shouted. Joren didn't hesitate. He grabbed the door handle and yanked it open, pulling Ethan inside with him. They rushed up the stairs, their footsteps echoing in the narrow, empty stairwell. But Joren's mind raced. The syndicate was closing in, and they needed to act fast. When they reached the top, Joren pushed open the roof access door. They stepped out onto the roof, the city skyline stretching out before them. But the peace didn't last long. A few seconds later, the sound of heavy boots on the stairs told them that the syndicate was right behind them. "We're not safe here yet," Ethan said, his voice tight. "We need a way out." Joren scanned the roof. It was a flat, open space with a few vents and air conditioning units scattered around. There was no immediate cover, but Joren's sharp eyes spotted something that could help. A neighboring building's rooftop was only a short jump away. "We can make that jump," Joren said, his voice steady. "Follow me." Ethan didn't question him. Without waiting, Joren ran toward the edge of the roof and jumped across the gap to the next building. His landing was smooth, and he immediately crouched low, gesturing for Ethan to follow. Ethan hesitated for just a second, then ran after Joren. He pushed himself to leap across the gap, landing hard but managing to stay upright. They both crouched behind a large air conditioning unit, trying to make themselves as invisible as possible. They listened closely. The sound of the syndicate soldiers grew louder as they reached the roof. The agents were hunting them, but they had no idea where Joren and Ethan had gone. "They're looking for us," Ethan whispered, "but they don't know we're here." Joren nodded. They had bought themselves some time, but they weren't out of danger yet. The syndicate was still on their tail, and they needed to keep moving. "We need to get to the main highway," Joren said, his voice low but urgent. "From there, we can steal a vehicle. That'll get us out of the city." Ethan didn't question him. They knew that if they stayed in the city, they would be cornered. The syndicate's reach was vast, and they couldn't afford to stay in one place for too long. They moved quickly, darting from rooftop to rooftop, always staying a few steps ahead of the soldiers. The city below them seemed quiet, but they both knew it was far from safe. Every corner could hold a trap. Every shadow could hide an enemy. As they neared the edge of the city, they could hear the faint hum of traffic in the distance. It was their chance to escape, but the moment they stepped into the open, they would be exposed. "We make our move now," Joren said, his voice firm. "Stay close. We can't afford to lose each other." Ethan nodded, and together, they moved forward, determined, but aware that the hardest part was still to come. Joren and Ethan crouched low behind a stack of crates, their eyes scanning the street ahead. The noise of the city was muffled from the rooftops, but the distant hum of vehicles moving on the main highway grew louder with each passing second. It was their only chance to escape the syndicate's grasp. "We're almost there," Joren whispered, his eyes locked on the road. "Just a little farther." Ethan, who was breathing heavily from the sprint, nodded but didn't speak. His mind was racing just as fast as his heartbeat. They were so close to the highway, but there were still dangers waiting for them. The syndicate agents were relentless, and if they made one wrong move, their escape would be over. "They'll be looking for us in the streets," Ethan said quietly. "We need to stay hidden until we can make our move." Joren agreed. They had to be careful. The syndicate had eyes everywhere, and it wouldn't take long for them to realize the two mercenaries had slipped through their net. They couldn't risk being seen. The night had grown darker, but the stars above provided just enough light for them to see the street ahead. The traffic on the main highway was heavier now, with vehicles zooming by at high speeds. It was the perfect cover for them to slip away unnoticed. "This is our chance," Joren said, standing up slightly. "We move now. Stay close." Without waiting for a response, he darted from behind the crates and made his way toward the street. Ethan followed closely, his hand on his sidearm, ready for anything. The two of them stuck to the shadows, keeping as low as possible as they approached the highway. As they reached the edge of the road, they ducked behind a parked vehicle, trying to stay out of view. The rush of the cars driving by only made their hearts race faster. They needed to act quickly, but they couldn't afford to make any mistakes. "We need to find a vehicle," Joran said, scanning the street for anything that might be useful. "We'll steal one and head out of the city." Ethan nodded. There was no other option. The syndicate would be on high alert soon, and if they didn't move quickly, they would be trapped. They needed to blend in with the traffic, not stand out. Ahead, Joran spotted a sleek, black car parked by the side of the road. It was a high-end model, likely belonging to someone important. The perfect getaway vehicle. "There," Joran whispered. "We take that one." Ethan's eyes darted over to the car. He frowned. "What about the owner?" "We don't have time to worry about that," Joran replied, his voice urgent. "We need to move now." The two of them moved quickly, crossing the road in a low crouch. They reached the car without incident, and Joran immediately went to work. He quickly popped the door open and started fiddling with the controls. The sleek vehicle had a security system, but Joran was skilled with tech. Within moments, the door clicked open. "Let's go," Joran said as he slid into the driver's seat, motioning for Ethan to get in the passenger seat. Ethan didn't hesitate. He jumped into the car, slamming the door behind him. Joran wasted no time. He revved the engine, and they sped off into the night, weaving through traffic. For a few moments, they were in the clear. The bright city lights blurred around them as they raced toward the outskirts of town. Joran's grip on the steering wheel tightened, his mind focused on the road ahead. They needed to get as far away as possible, but there was still a long way to go. Ethan kept watch over his shoulder, his eyes darting between the rearview mirror and the street ahead. "They'll be looking for us." "I know," Joran replied, "but we're faster than they think." The car zoomed through the streets, dodging slower vehicles and weaving between lanes. Joran's driving was sharp, his every move calculated. He had been in situations like this before, and he knew how to lose a tail. But just as they neared the highway, a loud screeching sound filled the air. Joran's eyes widened as he spotted a syndicate vehicle in the distance, tailing them. "We've been spotted," Ethan shouted. Joran didn't hesitate. He slammed his foot down on the accelerator, sending the car speeding forward. The engine roared as they surged ahead, but the syndicate vehicle wasn't far behind. It was gaining on them. "Hold on," Joran shouted as he swerved the car into a sharp turn, narrowly avoiding a collision with an oncoming truck. The car shot down a side street, but the syndicate vehicle followed without hesitation. "They're not giving up," Ethan said, his voice tense. "Neither are we," Joran replied, his eyes scanning for a way out. They were almost at the highway now. But the syndicate was relentless. They had to act fast, or they would be boxed in. "We need to get to the highway," Joran urged. "Once we're on there, we can lose them." The sound of tires screeching echoed behind them as the syndicate car took the same sharp turn, closing in. Joran didn't let up. He pushed the car harder, willing it to go faster, to get them out of this situation. They were almost there. Joran's hands gripped the steering wheel as he pushed the car faster. The roar of the engine filled the air, but his mind was focused only on the road ahead. The syndicate's car was still behind them, but he could see the glimmer of the highway in the distance. It was their last chance to escape. "We're almost there," Joran muttered, trying to keep his voice steady. He could feel the sweat on his brow, his heart pounding in his chest. "Hold on, Ethan." Ethan was silent for a moment, his eyes locked on the rearview mirror. "They're still behind us." "I know." Joran's voice was sharp. "But we can't stop now." The car raced toward the highway, but the syndicate wasn't giving up. Joran could see their vehicle gaining on them, just a few meters away. The streets were beginning to clear, but they didn't have the time to slow down. "Get ready," Joran warned as he veered onto the on-ramp for the highway. The car swerved to the right, narrowly avoiding a collision with a passing truck. They were on the highway now, but the syndicate's car wasn't far behind. Ethan looked at Joran, his jaw set in determination. "They won't stop until we're caught. We won't give them the chance." Joren gritted his teeth. He was done running. He knew what he had to do. As the highway stretched out before them, Joren could see an open stretch of road ahead. There were no other cars around, and it seemed like the perfect place to make their stand. "Get ready to fight," Joren said, his voice low but full of confidence. "We'll make our stand here." Ethan's hand instinctively went to his weapon, his eyes scanning the road ahead for any sign of danger. "What's the plan?" "We're going to stop the syndicate car before they can get any closer." Joren's grip tightened on the wheel as he turned the car into the middle lane. The road was clear, but time was running out. Suddenly, the syndicate car made its move. It swerved toward them, trying to block them off, but Joren was ready. He slammed the car into high gear and swerved just in time to avoid a direct hit. The two cars narrowly missed each other, but the syndicate wasn't done yet. "They're getting desperate," Ethan said, his voice tense. "They'll try again." "I know." Joren's eyes were locked on the road, his focus unwavering. "We have one chance. If we don't stop them here, it's over." The syndicate car pulled up beside them, its engine growling as it matched their speed. Joren could see the driver's face through the window, eyes filled with cold determination. They were ready for a fight. "Hold on," Joren shouted. He jerked the wheel hard to the right, sending their car into a sharp turn. The syndicate car tried to follow, but it was too slow. Joren pushed his car to the limit, forcing it to break free from their pursuit. But it wasn't over yet. The syndicate car swerved around and made another attempt to box them in. This time, they were closer, dangerously close. "Now," Joren shouted, and in that instant, he took a sharp left turn, heading for an abandoned building off the highway. Ethan held on tightly as the car slid across the gravel and dirt. They were out of the main highway now, hidden from the syndicate's view. The chase had shifted, but they weren't safe yet. The syndicate's car followed them, kicking up dust as it sped toward the same building. Joren knew they had only a few seconds to make their next move. "Get ready to jump," Joren said, eyes scanning the surroundings. He was looking for something, anything, that could give them an edge. He had one idea, and it would have to work. Ethan, his pulse racing, glanced around. "What are we doing?" "We're going to use the building as cover," Joren explained. "It's our only chance." The syndicate car was almost on top of them now, the engine roaring as it closed in for the final strike. Joren's heart beat faster, but he kept his cool. This was it. He hit the brakes hard. The car screeched to a halt just in time, sliding to a stop behind the abandoned building. The syndicate car flew past them, not expecting the sudden turn. It took a few moments before the other car realized what had happened. Joren and Ethan quickly got out of the vehicle, weapons drawn, ready to face whatever came next. They had survived the chase, but the fight was far from over. From behind the building, they could see the syndicate's car reversing, preparing to come after them. This time, it would be a fight for their lives. "This is it," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline. "No turning back now." Joren gave him a nod. "Let's make sure they never forget this." The battle was about to begin, and neither of them was going to back down. Joren and Ethan crouched behind the crumbling walls of the old building, listening carefully to the sound of the approaching syndicate car. The air was tense, each breath slow and measured, as if the world had paused just for a moment. The heavy thrum of the engine grew louder, and the crunch of gravel under tires echoed in the silence. Joren's heart was pounding, but his mind was focused. He looked at Ethan, who was ready, his hand firmly gripping his weapon. They knew the syndicate wouldn't give up easily. This was their final chance to stop them for good. The syndicate car stopped a few meters away from their position, its engine cutting off with a sharp hiss. The silence that followed felt deafening. Joren's hand tightened around his gun as he glanced at Ethan. "They're waiting for us to make the first move," Joren said in a low voice. "We can't give them that." Ethan nodded, his face set in determination. "We'll take them down when the time is right." The sound of footsteps came next. Slow, deliberate, as if the Syndicate's mercenaries were preparing for something. Joren knew they wouldn't rush in. They were too smart for that. They would approach carefully, trying to corner them. From their hidden position, Joren could see a shadow moving along the edge of the building. He motioned for Ethan to stay still. It was time to be patient. Seconds stretched into minutes. Then, without warning, the door of the Syndicate car slammed open. Two mercenaries stepped out, their eyes scanning the area. They had clearly been trained for situations like this, their movements calculated and efficient. But Joren wasn't worried. He had dealt with people like this before. The mercenaries walked closer to the building, their weapons drawn, scanning for any signs of movement. They were getting closer. Joren could feel the tension in the air, but he stayed calm. Every move had to be perfect. Then, just as one of the mercenaries came around the corner, Joren made his move. He burst from his hiding spot, gun raised and fired. The shot echoed in the night, the mercenary dropping to the ground before he even had time to react. Ethan was right behind him, moving fast. He fired at the second mercenary, hitting him in the shoulder. The man staggered, cursing under his breath as he ducked behind the car. The first round of the fight was theirs. "They're not down yet," Ethan shouted, reloading quickly. Joren nodded. "Keep moving. We can't let them regroup." The sound of more footsteps echoed from the other side. The remaining Syndicate mercenaries were closing in fast. Joren and Ethan didn't have much time. They needed to act quickly. As the second mercenary took cover behind the car, Joren and Ethan darted to the side, using the building for cover. The remaining mercenaries were now caught between the two of them, trapped in the middle of the open space. They didn't have much room to maneuver. "We need to end this now," Joren said, his voice low but determined. "On three." Ethan didn't hesitate. 1. Joren tightened his grip on the gun. He could feel the weight of the moment, the knowledge that they couldn't fail now. The Syndicate would stop at nothing to take them down. 2. The world seemed to slow down, and for a brief moment, Joren felt like he could see every detail, the faintest movement of a shadow, the glint of the Syndicate's weapon in the dark, the crackle of gravel underfoot. 3. In an instant, they both sprang into action. Joren fired once more, hitting the remaining mercenary in the leg. Ethan followed up with a clean shot to the mercenary's chest. The last of the Syndicate's men fell, hitting the ground with a heavy thud. Silence returned, this time final and complete. Joren lowered his weapon, his heart still racing. "It's over." Ethan took a deep breath and nodded, lowering his own gun. "We did it." They stood there for a moment, catching their breath, before moving forward to check the bodies of the fallen mercenaries. They didn't take any chances. The fight was over, but they knew they had to be thorough. "We can't stay here long," Joren said, looking at the destroyed car. "The Syndicate will send reinforcements." Ethan nodded in agreement. "Let's get out of here." As they made their way back to their car, the weight of their victory settled in. They had won, but it wasn't the end. The Syndicate was a powerful enemy, and they both knew there would be more battles to come. "What now?" Ethan asked, glancing at Joren. Joren smiled, his face grim but confident. "Now we go after the Syndicate," he said, "and we make sure they never come after us again." As they drove away into the night, their mission was clear. The battle was over, but the war was just beginning.